coming up.
We're
nervous, scared.
Yeah, we're scared. We're getting more sandbags and just buckling down the best we can.
After suffering severe drought through much of 2022, California is slammed by record-setting storms.
Volume of the water that was coming down just wreaked havoc.
And predictions say the economic cost of climate-related disasters there could triple in coming decades.
This disaster destroyed all our equipments. We had to throw away all our produce.
We continue exploring soy, its benefits or otherwise, and impacts on the environment. But first,
Sono Luca Trivellone e faccio parte della campagna di Ultima Generazione. Sono qui oggi per parlare della nostra indignazione con il nostro governo e del motivo per cui abbiamo deciso di lottare per il nostro pianeta. This is Just 2 Degrees on TRT World.
I'm Reagan, welcome to the program. Well, the New Year's barely started, but climate activists aren't wasting any time.
Et lui a laissé un délai pour réparer les dégâts de son inaction climatique. Le délai est arrivé à son terme le 31 décembre 2022.
Members of the French group Generazione, or Last Renovation, protested recently against what they call climate crimes committed by the state. They evaded security guards at the Prime Minister's office and spray paint on the front of the building. They wore T-shirts with the slogan, "Who is guilty?" In a statement, the group said it wished to denounce the government's facade of climate action. Now, the protester you saw being dragged was referring to a ruling by the Paris Administrative Court in 2021 that said France must honour its commitments to repair ecological damage between 2015 and 2018 and to prevent further damage. France reportedly emitted 62 million more tons of carbon dioxide between those years. Environmental groups, including Greenpeace, launched a petition in 2019 citing the country's climate inaction and culpable failure. It's reported there were 2.3 million signatures on the appeal. The government between 2021 and last year were ordered to pay 3 separate fines totaling around $32 million for failing to bring air pollution levels below regulatory thresholds throughout the country. And the state was given until the last day of 2022 to fix the problem.
Our goal was simply to denounce a state that has officially committed a crime, since it's been convicted in trial of the century last year. This conviction ordered the state to fix its negative climate impacts by December 31, 2022. This hasn't been the case. Greenhouse gas emissions have not or have only barely gone down in 2022. So today, the state is officially guilty. Who is responsible for this tragedy that will unfortunately cost the lives of millions of people in the coming years, that will lead to wars, famines? We have to act. And this is why we invite citizens who share our values and who want to protect those close to them, to join the civil residents and join us in disruptive actions that will force the government to act and take the emergency seriously.
Meanwhile, in Italy, things got pretty heated too. Environmental activists sprayed what they said was paint that could be easily removed on the walls of the Senate building in Rome. They're from Ultima Generazione, which translates to last generation. The group says it's driven by desperation over what they say is an eco-climatic collapse. They add the government inaction could lead to, quote, the greatest genocide in the history of humanity. And as is the case following many climate-related demonstrations of late, Italians have taken to social media to describe how they felt. This person says the protests are organized as if they were terrorist attacks. Interesting. The poster also suggests that Ultima Generazione be dismantled before it does more dangerous things. And this poster expressed a popular concern, cleaning up after protests. He says, quote, what these ecological fanatics don't understand is that filth is cleaned up with the money of us mere mortals. And he continues, quote, when you block the junction, you do damage to families, not to the powerful. Well, Ultima Generazione is with us on Just 2 Degrees. One of its members, Luca Trivellone, is as passionate as one can get as an environmentalist. He joins me from Padova, Italy. Luca, it's good seeing you.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me.
First, I want you to address what we just heard from people who criticize the group as destructive and disruptive. What do you say to people like that?
So our actions are non-violent, and in the Senate we sprayed with orange washable paint the entrance. Within minutes it was clear. And when people talk about the vandalism of the paintings in Van Gogh, we had an action, similar action, where we sprayed with some vegetable soup. We attacked the protective glass. All of our actions are taught and studied, and they don't create a damage. The only real damage that's being created is the irreversible climate change related issues that my country is facing. You started the program saying things are getting pretty heated, and that's perfectly what's happening here, because we just had the hottest year we have ever faced in Italy. So when things are getting heated, it's not because of our actions, it's actually because of climate change.
Yeah, and there are heat waves recorded all across Europe so far for January. Let's go to why Ultima Generazione is doing this. I mean, like most countries, Italy is part of the Paris Accord and committed to decreasing its emissions by 30% by the year 2030. But you obviously don't think that the country is on the right path. What is the government doing that you guys are unhappy with?
So the previous government was aiming to reach 2030 with 72% of renewables. That means 80 gigawatts of renewables each year. They only accomplished 1 out of 10 of this target, and they're going very, very slowly to achieve this. We are asking no gas, no carbon, and 20 gigawatts of renewable starting from this year, according to what the Paris Agreement what was promised by the international governments at the Paris Agreements, to make it possible to stay within the 2 degrees of climate temperature rising. So we are asking what's the bare minimum from the government to reach this this target. And the fact we are going through these civil disobedience actions to this really powerful action to gain visibility is because not only we want to talk about climate change, not only we want to talk about the broken promises the government had, we need to take actions. Starting right now. We are facing 6 mass extinction and we are living in it. Last year in Ischia and in the Marche in Italy, we had over 20 people died, 20 Italians that lost their life because of climate change. And Italy is the 6th investor so far worldwide for fossil fuel, $2.8 billion each year of public funding goes through fossil fuel, which is killing us. That cannot be possible.
Well, that said, Luca, according to the European Parliament, Italy reduced its emissions by 13% by the year 2020, and the country is expected to reach 2030 targets. But I do get your point that within recent years, you want to see more action from the government. Luca, I want to toss a few scenarios at you from the reaction on social media to your most recent protests, Ultima Generazione's recent protests. A lot of people are not happy with it, and I just want to get your reaction to those comments. Firstly, some people don't think Italy's emissions are large enough to affect global warming. Your response?
So, as it is now, in Italy each year, there's 55,000 as an average of Italians dying for air pollution. And that's the same of the population of the island of Venice dying each year for that. We are the second in EU for death related to pollution. Then you were saying about the targets of our government. The only target we should talk about is how our government is looking for gas in our sea. They believe that they could reach energetic independence by getting the gas that we have in our sea. But the previous government told us clearly that there's no enough gas in our sea. There will be just the need of 1 year of what the national demand is in our sea. And at the moment, they're going to dig into our sea, something that the same members of parliament that are in power now were against back in the 2016 referendum. So we're facing something that is going to race towards climate collapse rather than bringing us some hope. And we are talking about now, we're not talking about 2015. People and Italians are dying right now. And yes, Italians have a huge impact worldwide since we are the 6th investor worldwide. We are worse than Russia and Saudi Arabia for investment in fossil fuel.
All right, Luca, it's clear that when you look at the protests by Ultima Generazione, the protests are quite small. You guys don't have a lot of support from Italians. For example, people on Twitter are saying that you won't get the reaction you want because you're too obstructive and that your actions will just amount to petty vandalism. What do you plan on doing anything to get more support from the public?
So far, we have had around 80 activists that decided to get arrested for Ultima Generazione. That's already an achievement that was never reached before in Italian activism after the World War. And counting the coalitions we've had with other movements, we are over 100 activists that decided to put themselves at risk, that decided to sacrifice their own freedom to gain spaces like this and to get the response from the government. So we are not little, we are ever growing since we started. Remember, we started from 21. So this will be only our second year. And in 2 years, we have reached and accomplished things that other movements have never achieved. On the TV entertainment programs, we are talking about climate change 30% more compared to the previous of our campaign Ultima Generazione. And we unlocked 10 gigawatts of the 20 we are asking with our demands. And we want to keep going until we reach no gas and no carbone, because that's the only way we could give a positive future for our Italians and an opportunity to have a work in our future, an opportunity to live a life, because we don't have one at the moment.
All right, Luca Trivellone from the group Ultima Generazione. It was great chatting with you. We'll be following your work very closely. And of course, we find your cause very noble. Thank you so much for joining us here on Just 2 Degrees. All right, well, a weather phenomenon called an atmospheric river recently dumped a record-setting amount of rain across parts of California in the first week of the new year. The atmospheric storm, one of 3 to hit the state since late December, flooded neighborhoods, downed trees, and caused power outages for tens of thousands of people. In the city of San Francisco, 13.9 centimeters of rain fell, the second highest amount in more than 170 years. And that's after much of the state suffered a crippling drought in 2022, just last year. But Matthew Cappucci is here with us from Washington, D.C. He is an atmospheric scientist. Hi, Matthew. It's good seeing you. The last time we spoke, we were talking about bomb cyclones in the northeast of the U.S. Now, the northwest of the country is in trouble. What are these atmospheric rivers we're hearing so much about in the news? What are they?
Yeah, you're exactly right. So in this case, it's actually all being driven by another bomb cyclone, or a massive sprawling low-pressure system that originated north of Hawaii, then rapidly intensified en route to Oregon. But here's the thing. That very significant bomb cyclone is sucking air in from all sides, and it entrains a filament of deep tropical moisture from north of Hawaii, pulls out essentially a river of moisture, or that atmospheric river, all the way to California, and douses them with that moisture fire hose. Now, atmospheric rivers ordinarily carry the bulk of their moisture about 1.5 kilometers above the ground. That's why the mountains see the most precipitation, whether that be heavy rain or snow. In this case, it's so moisture-loaded that even the lowlands of California, for example, San Francisco, San Jose, Reagan, all those other areas, Sacramento, are seeing prolific rainfall totals, coming atop an already wet pattern where the ground is saturated, more trees are coming down, strong winds as well. San Francisco just saw gusts of nearly 100 kilometers per hour, so a very significant event out there this evening.
Hey, Matthew, we were talking about it so much last year, these droughts across the state of California. Now there are these massive amounts of rainfall. Is this type of weather normal for the state?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, believe it or not, both are actually catalyzed by climate change. A lot of folks will say, hey, those two things are antithetical. Those two things are opposite. How can you have two opposite things caused by the same thing? It all comes down to something we call the Clausius-Clapeyron relationship. Basically, for every degree Celsius the air temperature warms, the air can hold about 7% more moisture. What that means is that where moisture is available, you have a lot more moisture in the air and heavier rainfall. But where moisture is not available, for example, oftentimes in the West Coast, you're just drying out the atmosphere even more, sucking moisture out of the ground and reinforcing drought. So in the case of California, most of the time, there's not much moisture available. You don't have these strong storm systems, so you get the drought. But when moisture is introduced, for example, with an atmospheric river setup, then you have that much more juice in the air, you get heavier downpours, and you get more flooding. So both things, seemingly opposites, are very closely related.
We understand California has been trying to revamp its climate policy. But Matthew, an environmental economist on the Independent Emissions Market Advisory Committee says the state is not on track to meet climate targets and says everything the state is doing is, quote, a superficial exercise filled with so many faults and errors. What does he mean by that?
Well, I think one of the things is that people expect instant gratification when it comes to climate change. In other words, if they stop emitting altogether right now, they think, hey, things are going to get better. That's not the case for two reasons. Number one, for example, the chemicals that we put in the atmosphere, the greenhouse gases, have kind of a long memory. They kind of stick around for a while. And so subsequently, even if we were to stop emitting like this, they would likely still have some effect. And naturally, the Earth is in the midst of sort of positive feedback mechanisms. And so it's tough to get climate change to stop all of a sudden. It's kind of like a runaway freight train. It takes a while to pump the brakes on that. Number two, even if California were to stop emitting altogether and adopt 110% green energy, which is not necessarily realistic, we still have greenhouse gases from overseas, pollution from overseas. For example, China, East Asia, a lot of areas that do United States manufacturing blowing overseas and causing issues with pollution in California. That was especially bad back about 20 years ago, but it's still a problem. So I think that even if California does their best, it'll be tough to meet their goals. And the other thing you need to remember, too, California is unfortunately a very much a vehicle-prone city. In other words, we didn't really construct our infrastructure in the United States around mass transit, rail, things of that nature. So it's tough to get clean air, clean energy when you have millions and millions of people all in vehicles commuting every day.
All right, Matthew, great touching base with you. Thank you. The popular meat and dairy replacement, soy, is at the tips of tongues as people work out their dietary needs during this Veganuary. Being vegan for the month of January isn't a new concept, but what we should or shouldn't eat is an ever-evolving topic. Soy is rich in protein, fiber, vitamins, and minerals, and said to contain all the essential amino acids, according to some doctors. But if it's so good, why does it have a bad reputation? Well, Joe Feren is here to help clarify things. He's an accredited practicing dietitian, fondly known as the nutrition guy, and Joe joins me from Melbourne. Hi, Joe. I'm hoping you can answer all of our questions today when it comes to soy. Why does soy have such a bad reputation?
I really don't understand why soy continues to polarize people. As you said in your intro, it's packed full of protein, fiber, calcium. It's a good source of iron as well. So really, we should be wholeheartedly embracing soy because it really is good for us. And it's also delicious. So why wouldn't you want to get around soy, particularly for those people who are following vegan for the month of January? Or maybe just focusing on eating more plant foods in their diet. We definitely want to be encouraging people to have more soy foods, be it soy milk, tofu, tempeh, and the like.
You know, before on the program, we have spoken with vegans who said that they limit the amount of soy products they consume. Is this a situation of eating too much soy is bad for you?
Look, eating too much of anything probably isn't so great for us, and we definitely want to encourage diversity in the diet. But from my perspective, having 2 to 3 serves a day of soy foods is perfectly okay. So that might be 150 grams of tofu, it might be a couple of glasses of soy milk, and you've ticked that box. So you definitely don't want to put all your eggs in one basket and just focus on soy foods. You still want to focus on all the other foods from the various food groups. But as I said before, we definitely want to be embracing foods like soy.
All right, we know some foods can affect men and women differently. First, let's look at women. The claims that soy can cause different forms of cancer in women. True or false?
It's false. The evidence doesn't support it. And if we're looking at something like breast cancer, because I think there are some misnomers around soy and breast cancer, the evidence actually shows that if anything, soy foods have what we call a neutral effect on breast cancer. But in many studies, they've actually shown that soy foods can actually be protective against breast cancer.
What about for men, Joe? Testicular cancer, is it a problem there?
Not that I'm aware of. I want to highlight prostate cancer because we know that prostate cancer accounts for 15% of cancers in men. And what we actually find is that countries where they have a high soy intake, particularly across Asia, that there's a reduction in the incidence of prostate cancer. So, we can't say it's a cause and effect relationship, but there's potentially something in it. So once again, for men who may be avoiding soy foods because of a fear that it's going to increase their risk of cancer, the evidence just doesn't support it, and quite the contrary.
So then where did all these rumors start, Joe?
Look, there's a compound in soy called phytoestrogens. It's a compound actually called isoflavone, which is I guess, belongs to the family of phytoestrogens. And there's this theory that these particular compounds can disrupt our hormones, but they are very, very weak in nature. They're not going to decrease your testosterone or increase your estrogen. So I wonder if that's where some of the soy detractors have sort of focused on. But as I said, the evidence just doesn't support any concerns with soy consumption.
Yeah, and just to support what you're saying, the American Cancer Society once said that because possibly tests that were done on rodents, they're exposed to a compound called isoflavones, which you find in soy, and they showed cancer effects. But let's move on from this, because I'm glad you clarified that it's not dangerous for us and we can continue using it without problem. What about soy's impact on the environment? Do we see a problem there?
Yeah, look, this is a really interesting one. I mean, all food production is going to have a carbon footprint. It's going to have an effect on the environment. And interestingly enough, a large percentage of soy food that is manufactured or produced around the world is actually for animals. So yes, there's a large amount of land clearing that goes into soy production, but from what I've read recently, it's up to 85% of soy that's manufactured is actually used as animal fodder. So actually quite a small percentage of soy produced around the world is actually for human consumption. And look, I'm not going to hate on dairy and meat because I still think that those food sources can be valuable parts of our diet. But from an environmental perspective, it seems like soy production has less of an environmental impact than both meat and dairy production.
Meat eaters, Joe, argue all the time that there is no substitute for the vitamins and specifically the protein you get in meat. You can't get it anywhere else. Is that true, or can soy be an apt substitute for, say, beef and chicken?
Absolutely. There's no reason why it can't be. I mean, meat eaters might say that meat contains more protein, but more is not necessarily better. So while meat contains about 25 to 30% protein, tofu is probably going to be around the 15%. It's still a valuable source of protein. What I want to encourage people here today is not only to consume soy, but maybe also to consume a diverse range of foods in their diet. And maybe it's about consuming less meat over the week, adding in a few vegetarian or even vegan meals if you choose. But definitely we should be getting around soy and soy foods because they are such a valuable source of nutrition.
Joe, really appreciate you speaking with us today. Thank you so much for clarifying those things.
My pleasure. Enjoy following Veganuary.
Thank you. Bye. And before we leave you, here are pictures of a venture in a small Chilean community. People living there are in the habit of separating their organic and inorganic trash. They place potato and avocado skins and leftover fruits and vegetables where a special disposal unit can collect it. The food is then used to create compost that's then used to beautify the city. It's a good example of doing what's right for the environment and in a country that generates the largest amount of garbage in South America. The little things we do matter. Until next time, bye.